Welcome to the Joys of Binge Reading, the show for anyone who ever got to the end of a great book and wanted to read the next instalment. We interview successful series authors and recommend the best in mystery, suspense, historical and romance series, so you'll never be without a book you can't put down. You'll find this episode's show notes, a free ebook and lots more information at thejoysofbingereading.com. And now, here's our show.
H.Y. Hanna's Oxford Tearoom mysteries are for those who love TV shows like Inspector Morse and Midsomer Murders. They're twisty tales of revenge and death set in classic English villages. Hi there, I'm your host Jenny Wheeler. And today H.Y., who's known to her friends as Hsin Yee, talks about her intrepid graduate sleuth Gemma Rose and her cheeky cat, how she became an Oxford student herself, and why traditional treats like Victoria sponge and scones with cream play such a big role in her stories. Just a reminder, the show notes for this binge reading episode can be found on the website thejoysofbingereading.com. That's where you'll find a full transcript of our chat, plus links to Hsin Yee's books and website, as well as details about how to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss future episodes. But now, here's Hsin Yee. Hello there, Hsin Yee, and welcome to the show. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you for having me. It's very exciting to be on my first podcast.
It's lovely. And I'd just like to mention for listeners that I'm in Auckland, New Zealand, and you're in Perth, Western Australia. So we've got a lot of our ocean we're crossing between us, haven't we?
Yes, less though than I think between our readers and us, though.
That's right. Okay, look, beginning at the beginning, which is where I always like to start, was there a once upon a time moment when you decided you wanted to write fiction? And if there was a catalyst for it, what was it?
Well, I think all authors will tell you they always wanted to write. So that's probably not a very original answer, but that's pretty much my, as a little girl, I was always making up stories and, sitting in my room with little, those little figures I had little plastic animals that my parents bought me, little farm animals, and I enact little stories with them going back and forth, that sort of thing. So I guess I've always wanted to tell stories. And then as I got older, once I could start writing, I wrote little stories in my diary, usually featuring myself, but, going to buy an ice cream or something. But they were all, stories with a beginning, middle, and end. And so, I think as you sort of grow up a bit more, you think that's what I would like to be, a writer. And then, of course, reality intrudes and you get a little bit older than that and you realize, that generally speaking, it's not like saying I want to be a doctor or, I don't know, account manager or something. It's not as simple as that. And so usually, you get to a stage where everyone's like, oh, find a sensible job, do a normal job. So I sort of put that away for a while. I mean, I went to university, I did all the usual things and I did a selection of different jobs, actually, because I was very much trying to do what I was expected of me.
Yes.
And then I think it was one of those, I guess, we call them, I don't know, midlife crisis, for want of a better word, where I was approaching my 40th birthday and I started thinking, oh, what am I doing with my life? Where's it going? And I guess you get that feeling of, oh, I better do what I really want to do now. Otherwise, life is just passing me by. And I've been quite, unhappy is a bit of a strong word, but I was never really, really happy in any of the jobs I did. I tried various things and, you enjoy it because obviously you enjoy doing your work well, but it wasn't where my heart was. And creatively, I was always very, very frustrated.
Yes.
And so I think it wasn't a particular trigger event, but it was more, I guess, my looming 40th birthday where I just thought, right, if I don't do it now, it's never going to happen. And I was actually quite lucky at the time. I was moving into writing anyway, in the sense that I was working as a freelance writer, journalist, sort of writing for various magazines. And so I was already used to the whole thing of, working with an editor and, having a piece commissioned, writing to a certain word count, all those kinds of things. So, writing, I guess, for a living was already I was halfway there. I just wasn't writing fiction,
yes,
which is what I really wanted to do. So I suppose and it just sort of went from there, I suppose. You think, right, this is the time now to really write that novel. I did actually, to be honest, I did start writing novels in my early 20s. So when I was working in London, I did start several novels then, and I actually had one novel. I completed actually a couple then. And I had one novel that got very close to publication. I had an agent in the UK, and it got considered by one of the big publishers there called Hodder and Stoughton.
Yes, I know them. Yes.
And it got quite close to a book deal. But what happened was the editor who liked it left. She actually came to Australia. And like all these things, you know, when the editor that likes your manuscript leaves and they were championing it, the next editor comes and they don't always like the same thing. And so that sort of fizzled out. And I think I wasn't giving myself permission very much, in the sense that I tried it and then I thought, no, you know, this is me being silly again. I need to go back and do a normal job.
Yes.
And you know, there's that expectation, I suppose. Maybe I put it on myself. I don't know. I'm also Chinese. You know, I'm Asian, and so I don't know if you know. You probably do know, but you know, in Asian culture, there's a big expectation that there are only 4 jobs that are acceptable. You know, you're a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, or a teacher, or a dentist, maybe at a push. You know, those are the sort of acceptable professions if you want to be considered successful.
Yes.
And anything creative is, oh my God, you know, you want to be a creative. You know, it's a terrible thing to suggest. So, because there's no job security being a creative. And so, you know, I think with that culture, it's very much, you know, you go with those respectable, reliable, you know, professional careers.
Yes. I was just going to ask how you then decided that it was going to be mysteries you were going to write. Those first couple of novels that you did, were they mysteries?
The first one was, I started with children's fiction because obviously as a child I loved to read.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was the original, I'm sure lots of authors say this, but, you know, I was the child who walked around with the nose in the book all the time, you know, eating. And I used to go find a quiet corner and sit on the stairs and just read all day and get in trouble for not, you know, appearing for hours. And so obviously I was very much wanting to pass that, you know, to recapture that experience I had as a child and to pass it on.
Yes.
And also I loved Nancy Drew as a child. You know, when people used to ask me what I wanted to be when I grew up, I always said I wanted to be Nancy Drew, because genuinely that's what I wanted to be. And especially I really wanted her red hair. I loved her hair like that. But yeah, so I thought, you know, I'd like to write a mystery series like Nancy Drew for children of the age I was when I got into books. So that's middle grade is what they call it on the American market, sort of 9 to 12 years old. And obviously I love animals. And I had at the time my Great Dane, she's passed away now, but I had her at the time. And so, you know, it was very much inspired by her as well. And I also, the other book I loved when I was a child was The 101 Dalmatians by Dodie Smith.
Yes.
So this is the original, not the Disney film. Which is darker actually. Mm-hmm. And I loved the sort of tone of that book. And so it was very much a bit, I suppose, of homage to both. It was a combined thing of very much, you know, a group of dogs that are friends, and they tackle mysteries together. You know, a puppy goes missing, or you know, something happens, and they track down and each of the dogs are from a different breed, and so the personalities are very much taken from the breed characteristics. So for dog lovers, it was a bit of fun, you know, sort of the Jack Russell with the small dog syndrome and the the dopey Great Dane and all that sort of thing. Yeah. So I did. That was the first one and then I dabbled a bit in a few other genres, just because I think I wasn't, to be honest, I always knew I wanted to write mystery, but I think sometimes you're a little bit, I don't know, you're a bit afraid, like you haven't got the confidence to do the thing you really want to do, the thing, you know, the genre you love to read, because you always think you're not good enough to tackle that.
Yes.
So I suppose, and also because, you know, I was listening, I guess, to probably, I'm very easily influenced sometimes by advice from people around me if they sound very confident, you know, because I guess I lack confidence myself. And so if they say, oh, write this, it's, you know, blah, 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 I sort of think, oh, yes, that's right. I must, you know, listen to someone much more experienced. And so I tried the various other genres and you know, like for example, I tried to write romance, sweet romance in my case, because I wasn't very comfortable writing sex scenes. So sweet romance doesn't involve any graphic descriptions of sex. You know, it's closed door is what they call it. But I found I kept trying to put a dead body in the story all the time. You know, like I kept deviating from the plot line of, you know, in a romance, the important thing is whether the boy and the girl get together. That's the whole point of a romance story. And I just kept wanting to put in, you know, people getting murdered or suspicious activity and all this sort of thing. And then I finally sort of sat down and thought, I'm writing the wrong thing, you know, but I really want to write this mystery. So I gave in to that.
Yes, I think a decade or so ago, if a woman an adult woman said they wanted to be a novelist, the automatic assumption was, well, write romance because it's so popular. But you came upon your Oxford Tea Room mysteries, and that's the one that's really making your name at the moment, I think. And they're set in classic English countryside. They're for people who love Inspector Morse and Midsomer Murders. They're the world that Inspector Morse and Midsomer inhabits. Were you also a fan of those shows yourself?
Yes, hugely. Yes. I mean, obviously, having been at Oxford myself, it was always sort of both fascinating and sort of, I guess, a bit of homesickness watching Morse on TV, because you recognize all the places that they film.
Yes.
And, you can go, oh, well, that's so-and-so. And you know exactly what the colleges are. And, because often they obviously change the names, which is what I do as well, for libel reasons, mainly, I think. But yes, I loved, and Midsomer, obviously, I mean, it's set in beautiful English countryside, and I love cottage gardens and that sort of romantic English countryside look. So that's appeals to me hugely. And also, the whole thing of having that little village and the quirky characters, the
yes.
The odd neighbor, that
yes.
sort of thing.
Yeah. The setting for the tea rooms is very authentic feeling. I wasn't surprised to discover that you had been at Oxford. Tell us a little bit about how you got there. Were you studying at the arts there, or?
No, actually. So I did. I mean, I was there as both an undergraduate and a graduate. I stayed on, but I went to university there. I was at one of the colleges, one of the Oxford colleges. Doing biological sciences is what they call it. So I was giving into the whole thing of, you should do a proper degree. And so I did a science degree. I mean, the school I went to was very, I don't know if old school is the correct term, but, they had this whole concept that if you were bright and you did well, you did science.
Yes.
And, you don't do arts unless you're failing, which is a terrible attitude, and I really wanted to do, philosophy and literature and history and all those arts type subjects. But in the school I was in, that was very much, the classes were split in two. And so if you got good grades, you got moved into the upper class, which basically did physics, chemistry, and biology. And that's what I did most of my high school. So I did biology at university.
Yes.
And then I stayed on and did a master's degree as well in social anthropology. So that was veering a bit more towards the arts, I suppose.
Yes.
But I have a very scientific background, though.
Yeah. And then I wonder how you decided on some of the aspects of the series. Like, you've got a very spunky heroine called Gemma Rose, and you've got a cheeky cat, and that cats and various other animals appear frequently in your stories. And also there's a lot of humour and a lot of food. That seems to be a common theme. So I love the title of them are things like Tea with Milk and Murder, and there's always a little bit of a joke there. How did you sort of come upon that tone and that sort of setting and really the whole sense of that world with people and cats and eccentrics and food, and a lovely warm feeling about it all?
Oh, I'm glad you like it. I don't know. It's various things. I mean, partly I think any writer will tell you that a lot of their books, what they intend to, and is autobiographical. So I think a lot of Gemma Rose is me, without me intending that. I mean, she's quite uptight and anxious and about what people think, and that I can be a little bit like that. Like, you write a lot of yourself into your characters. You also try and write some things that you would like to be, that you aren't, that you put into your characters as well. But definitely, and her sort of fraught relationship with her mother is very much mirrored by mine. I have a very, I love my mother and she's lovely, but, she's very, in her own way, quite, she's quite bossy and she's quite, quite mad sometimes. And so a lot of the scenes of Gemma struggling with her, her exasperation with her mother, is sort of inspired by my own relationship with my mother. And some of the things, like her mother's sort of technological issues, are sometimes inspired by my mother-in-law, who's lovely, but she struggles with her iPad. And that was actually one of those strange things. I didn't intend it. Like, I was just, it happened at the time, and she was always losing her password, and we were always helping her find it, and it was it was driving my and I thought it was quite funny, so I put it in. I didn't realize it was struck such a chord. Like, I've had so much fan mail about that particular scene, people writing to me saying that they love Gemma's mother, or her relationship with her mother, and that whole scene with the Apple password.
Yes,
Because basically that's them with their parents, and they can really relate. And I didn't realize at the time. So yeah, that's some of it. Is very much, I think, inspired without necessarily intentionally by your everyday life. And as far as, the cat's obviously inspired by my cat, Muesli. I have a cat called Muesli. She's a little rescue tabby. And so the Muesli in the story is inspired by my own cat, and partly my own relationship with the cat, because Gemma has in the beginning anyway, she isn't a cat person. And the cat,
that's right.
She doesn't mean to adopt one. And in the course of the story, things happen and she ends up with Muesli. And so there's a lot of initial back, with her learning what it's like living with a cat. And that's very much based on my own experiences, because I would say I was never a cat person. My husband loves cats. And that was the reason we got a kitten and a puppy at the time. So I was always the dog person. And since then, I've, obviously come to appreciate cats. But, there's still, I think I would say Muesli and I have a very up and down relationship. There are days where it drives me mad. But a lot of that feeds into the story, So things, things like Muesli in the story trying to crawl into holes in the walls, doing things that drive Gemma mad. They're all taken from my real life experience with the real life Muesli. That's helped, I suppose, that aspect of it.
Sure. Now, tell me, has your mum got used to the idea of having a daughter who's a writer rather than a scientist now?
Yeah, she has, actually. She's very proud of me now. I think at the beginning, she's never been a terrible, what do they call it, tiger mom or whatever they call it. She's always been very supportive from that. I think maybe a lot of pressure was put on me by myself, because I was, like the girl that, I was a very irritating girl at school, like Hermione, who always did her homework on time and who did everything was expected of her. So yeah, I think it wasn't so much her as me, but yeah, she has. She's very proud of me. But sorry, going back to what you were saying about the tone and stuff, that partly I was going to say that was also because one of the things I learned in the course of writing several books or several different genres is that it's very important to meet reader expectations. And when I started deciding I was going to write mystery, I had to obviously decide which type of mystery, because there are lots of different types. And I read all of it. I read crime fiction, and I read, everything from psychological suspense to cozies to, I don't know, police procedurals to, the whole range.
Mm-hmm.
But I realized when I was doing a bit of research that, in cozy, that there are certain expectations, the obvious ones like no swearing, no sex, no graphic violence. But often there is an expectation of a setting that's, a small setting, like a community and with quirky characters, and they're light stories with a lot of humor. And often, the readers enjoy learning about a hobby or a craft, and also obviously they're usually animal lovers. And the animal thing, because I'm an animal lover, it sort of comes in naturally. But so I was aware of some of those things. I tried to make sure that, I didn't put in something that the readers of cozies would think, I don't want to read about this. This isn't what I was expecting.
That's right.
And I think the setting helps because it's, it's in the English countryside. It's in Oxford, so it is a small town in an English country, so that gives that whole tone to it. And
it has a real resonance. People know what to expect, don't they? They know what they're going to get if you set something in an area like that. They have an expectation.
Oh, you hope so, yeah.
Yeah.
You can buck the trend, but I think you have to be a bit careful sometimes. I think it's a bigger challenge to fulfill expectations, but do it in a sort of original and fresh way, I suppose. That's sort of the real challenge.
And then your other mystery series, the Bewitched by Chocolate series, is that one a more recent series than Oxford Tearoom Mysteries? You started with the Oxford Mysteries, did you, and then went on to Bewitched by Chocolate?
Yes, yeah. So that came the year later, actually, and it's actually doing very well at the moment as well. I keep getting fans emailing, asking me when the next book's coming for that. But the problem with doing different series is you then have to split yourself, between your series, and it gets hard. You want to try and keep everyone happy, but you can only write so fast and only produce one book at a time. It's a bit like carrying a baby. You can only usually you carry one at a time. And so until you go through the whole pregnancy and give birth, then you start the next one. But yeah, so that one came later, and it's also set in the Cotswolds, so it's got very similar sort of feel in the sense of the beautiful English countryside. That the whole. People. A lot of my readers are, I think they call them Anglophiles, so people who love the English kind of thing,
Yes.
English afternoon tea and the whole Englishness of things. And so there's a lot of that. But the only difference really is that there's an element of paranormal in it, because I've always enjoyed, I love mythology and legends and that sort of thing.
Yes. Yeah.
And so a lot of that got fed, a lot of the Bewitched is based on English folk legends and, sort of old English mythology, that sort of thing. So that got fed into the stories because I just thought it'd be interesting to explore, that side of things. And there's obviously a food element because, as you said earlier, I love food. I love eating it. Well, as opposed to doing anything else, that's just something to say. But you know what I mean? Like, I love eating. Like, I wake up in the morning, my first thought is, what am I going to have for breakfast? And then I finish breakfast, I think, what am I going to have for lunch today? And so I'm always looking forward to my next meal. And I love describing food. And so I think that comes through, very much.
Very much,
with the Oxford series, that was very much focused on traditional British baking. So scones and, Victoria Sponge, that sort of thing.
Yes.
With the Bewitched by Chocolate, it's focused more on chocolate. So, and because partly also I love the film Chocolat. And all, I watched something about how they make chocolate, and the people actually not your standard kind of Mars bars, but the chocolatiers and all these sort of, it's almost like an art, what they managed to do with chocolate. It's amazing. So I really wanted to bring some of that into the series. And I thought it'd be quite fun because, witches are always about herbs and potions. And I thought, it'd be quite cool if they were, the powers were linked to chocolate and it was all a food kind of related type thing. So,
tell me, do you like to cook as well?
Sometimes. I have to say I'm not a very good cook. I'm very impatient, and so I'm very bad at following recipes. Like, I'll read it and then I'll think, I can't be bothered to measure out 10 grams or whatever it is. It'll be fine. I'll just put a bit of this, and I think I'm Jamie Oliver, but I'm not Jamie Oliver. I scatter things in and it doesn't come out right. But occasionally I manage to get it right. But overall, no, I wouldn't say I'm a very good cook.
Look, turning from specific books to having a look at your wider career, is there one thing you've done more than any other that you feel may be the secret to your success?
Oh God, that's a really hard question, that one, because I don't know. I mean, they say hindsight is 20/20. I guess, the usual answer they'll say as any author is persistence, like you should just not give up. But, and that's obviously very important. I think in my case, I would actually say just being myself, because there have been several instances from a career point of view where I've had advice from people to do, what the done thing is. And I've struggled with it because it's not me. And then sometimes I've taken the decision just to be myself. And I don't know, whether that was the right decision. Like, one example is like my newsletters. I have a very chatty style. It's just the way I talk as well. And I find it very difficult to be, formal and succinct. And I know that there's a feeling, for example, in a lot of the author community that newsletters should just be like an announcement thing of, like you should just tell people about your new releases or a sale that's coming up and that's it kind of thing, or about book recommendations. And that was very much the sort of advice given quite strongly, actually, that, anything else is considered spam, which I always thought was very, it was almost like, why would readers sign up to you in the first place? If, I sort of feel like, well, Amazon and a lot of those big people can tell them about book deals or things. Part of the reason for me anyway, if I signed up as a fan to someone, is because I want to find out, I'm interested in the whole process and in maybe the background of the books and the characters, that sort of thing.
So I was going to say that you did a lovely thing on your blog, and I think you did mention it in your newsletter as well, about that trip that you did to Vienna to celebrate your 20th wedding anniversary, a long planned trip of celebration, which was also paying homage to the author Mary Stewart, a very well established older author, and you really published a lot of photographs of all the things you'd done, and there was a lot of pleasure in just being able to share in that, and it was very generous. I think that
I didn't do that. That's what I mean. Like, that's sort of me, and I find it difficult not to be quite personal and chatty, and actually that trip was a research trip as well, so it was just lucky that it coincided with my 20th anniversary. And it sounds very nice to say that, but it was, I had been intending to write a book set in Vienna, and so it was very fortuitous, I suppose, that everything happened at the same time. And so I took loads of photos, partly also for research purposes. So I'm a very visual person, and so I need one picture to write a scene, like as the stepping off point.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, I love taking photos, and it's nice. I used to write a blog, like for quite a long time actually, and so it was quite, I'm used to doing that, like sharing photos and telling people a little bit about the background around, an experience or a journey, and I find people generally really enjoy that because it adds an extra dimension, I suppose.
Yeah.
And in that case, it definitely did, because the story, once I came home fresh from the trip, I wrote that book very much based off my trip. And you can actually literally see places I've been, and I've incorporated it into the story.
And that was Apple Strudel Alibi, was it?
Alibi, yes.
That's number 8 in the series.
Yes. I thought it was nice for a change also, just to go away from Oxford for a bit. And Austria is very much still in the same vein. And it's beautiful, romantic European city. And oh my God, the pastries and the cakes, it's just a slightly different country, but the cakes are amazing. I think I put on 3 kilos in a week or so there.
Oh, that's wonderful. Look, if you were going to tell your readers where to go in Oxford, a kind of magical mystery literary tour, for the Oxford Tea Room series, where would you recommend people go? Have you got any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I actually do have a blog or two. It's a 2-part blog post on my website, which again details when I returned to Oxford. So I made a trip back to Oxford in 2016, which is the first time I'd been back in 15 years since we left the UK, actually.
Yes.
And I took, again, lots of pictures. I mean, it was lovely revisiting a lot of the places which are featured in my books. And some places hadn't changed at all, and some obviously had. And so I've put all the pictures and, mentioned it. And so people, readers can actually basically literally look at those blog posts and see, if they want to visit settings in the book. But definitely, I could give you a list, but it's all mentioned there. But I mean, the one thing people often ask me, though, is that, like, where can they go for afternoon tea in Oxford, to replicate the experience? And unfortunately, in Oxford, there isn't actually like a little tea room. You can get like a formal traditional English afternoon tea in the Randolph Hotel, which is like their one big posh hotel in the city. Because Oxford city centre is not very big, and you get a beautiful, the whole sort of 4-tiered sort of English tea service. But it's quite formal in these beautiful drawing rooms, in the Randolph, which is an old, I think it's a Gothic, neo-Gothic building, or Victorian, I can't remember. But if you want an actual like little tea room experience, you have to go out of Oxford, really, into the Cotswolds. And the place that I was, when I thought of the Little Stables tea room, it was partly inspired by a tea room that I always used to go to when I was a student there. We, on a Sunday out morning, we'd go for a big walk out in the country sometimes, and then finish off having tea there. And it's in a village called Burford, Burford. And actually, I've been meaning, like, that's the part 3 of my book. I haven't got around to it yet. But I had pictures for that, for the tea room in Burford.
So it's still going?
Which was very much... Yes, it's still going. I think it's been going for 200 years or something. A really, really long time.
Wow, amazing.
I can't remember the name now off the top of my head now. I think something like Huff something.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's very much your traditional tea room.
Yes. Well, that's wonderful. That's fantastic. My mum was actually born in Oxford, I must admit. So although I've never, I went there once, but I've never spent any time there. She lived in New Zealand for all of her adult life after her marriage, and she married a Kiwi.
Right.
But funnily enough, I've still got a funny kind of place in my heart for Oxford, just because of all the old photographs on the walls and things like that,
Yeah, no, you should. I mean, you should definitely try and visit. I mean, even if it wasn't, if you because the books are very much set in and around Oxford, if you just visit, and as I said, the centre is quite small. If you just walk around, you can practically see a lot of the, and I do mention by name all the pubs. So basically, all the pubs and places in my books that I mentioned are real places in Oxford. The only thing that's changed is the college names. I change all the college names, which is in the same tradition of Morse and Lewis.
Yes, yeah.
Mainly because, they wouldn't be very happy if you started suggesting that they're the college master as a potential murderer or something. Right. So, anywhere you need a bit of creative license, you tend to change the names. But I try and include usually in every book one point of interest, like an attraction in Oxford, so that people can visit there. So, like a famous pub, or there's a lovely pub called the Turf Tavern, which is tucked right under, it's almost like hidden, and most tourists don't know about it. So that's mentioned in my blog post. And the little things like that and obviously the big colleges to visit.
Yes.
The one thing that strikes a lot of people, especially I think Americans, is that Oxford University doesn't have a campus as such. So the city is the campus. So that's, often people always ask that. Like when I was studying that, you'd come across very bemused-looking tourists. So I was like, can you tell me where the university is? Where's the campus? And you say to them, you're standing in it, because the way the university grew up, it grew up in and around the actual city, or the city grew around the university, whichever way you put it. And so as you walk around downtown, not downtown, the center of the city of Oxford, the colleges are all around you, the libraries are around you, etc. So there isn't a separate campus as such.
So moving along, the series is called The Joys of Binge Reading, and we're also very interested to know about your reading habits. Do you binge read yourself now? Do you even have time for it? I imagine that in the past you probably did. Who are some of your favorite authors, and who would you recommend to others?
I don't know about binge. I read continuously. Yes, now I don't read so much because I find if I'm writing, I'm really bad when I'm reading. It's like a drug, I can't stop if it's a really good book. If it doesn't hold my interest, I chuck it and I start the next book. So I sort of think life's too short to pursue. I'm not one of those people that must finish a book.
Yes, yeah.
If it doesn't capture me in the first couple of chapters, I leave it. I go on to the next. But if it's good, I just want to read it constantly. Like I don't want to do anything else, and I stay up till 3 a.m. reading it, and I don't want to work, and so I have to do a self-imposed fast, I guess, reading fast, where I don't read when I'm writing, which unfortunately because I'm writing so much these days that I don't read as much as I used to. So I read between books. Like when I finish a book, I indulge for a week, and then yes, I do binge read in that week, and get a couple of books in before I start again.
Yeah.
I actually don't at the moment. I read mysteries and crime fiction all my life, and now that I'm writing it, I find I don't often want to read it just because I guess it feels more work. You want to do something totally different. Yeah. So my guilty pleasure is young adult dystopian and fantasy. I love YA dystopian. So all the stuff like Hunger Games, that sort of, but also the light fantasy. And so one of my favorite authors for that is an American author called Laini Taylor, Laini, and then Taylor. She's got her first series called Daughter of Smoke and Bone. And I guess I love it because it's very steeped in mythology and legends, but not the shallow stuff, not the thing that people just talk about every day. She's obviously done a huge amount of, she has a lot of knowledge, and it's very interesting, more unusual type of mythology. But mainly I love her because her writing is so beautifully descriptive. And I know now there's a whole thing of, which I think is a little bit like throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but where people tell you, especially in writing classes, don't write descriptive prose, don't write long descriptions because nobody wants to read them and it's very boring, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's a great shame. It's like a lost art. The older authors used to write beautiful descriptive prose. And nowadays people write mostly short clipped, things. And there's a lot of telling, like, it was blue, without actually really giving you the sense of it. And obviously there are times when it's good to just tell. You don't want to always be waxing on, but I think it's a lost art, really. And there's a lot of dialogue, and readers say they don't want to read through lots of description, but I sometimes think it's just there isn't. There's good description, there's bad description, and I think it's a lost art now. That a lot of people just don't even start trying to learn how to describe well because they think it's all bad. And that's something readers often tell me. That's one recurring comment I get from readers a lot, that they love my books because of the vivid sense of setting and because they can almost taste the scones, when I write about them. They feel like they could be there, they could be touching, it's very, very vividly described. And that's mainly because I love books like that. So I love books where the writer really is painting a picture with words, if you like to use a cliche. And Laini Taylor does that beautifully. You could read her work, and it really, her first series is set partly in Prague. And I love books where when I read them, I want to go there. That to me is a really book, Yes. So, so she's one of my favorite authors.
I guess looking backwards, you have mentioned that Mary Stewart.
Yes, she's another one who's very good at that. Oh my God, some of her, I have all her books and I read them in rotation, like as a comfort, like I could quote from them probably. I love Mary Stewart. But I always vividly remember like one of her stories. The heroine is sort of, I think, on the run or something. She stops for a moment, like she's hungry and she's tired and she's in a car chase, and she gets out of the car and just, because she's so hungry, she stops at some small garage. and they make something, I think it was an omelette or something. And anyway, she describes this meal that she gets given. It's just a really simple thing. But I vividly remember she describes how the bread, the slice of bread, was warm and that it left little condensation droplets on the plate when she lifted it up.
Oh,
And
yes.
oh my God.
Yes.
And it was such a tiny little observed detail. But, you know, when I read that scene, I could taste, I could feel and I could taste that freshly baked, still warm bread, you know, with the crusty outside, the soft, moist inside.
Yes.
But just because she mentioned that tiny bit about the condensation, which is so true, isn't it? When you pick up a piece of bread that's freshly baked, it leaves that tiny bit of and that sort of thing. And I always remember that. And when I write, you know, a lot of that is I mean, I don't think you consciously do it, but if you love that kind of writing, that's what you tend to do, you know. And hopefully my readers do tell me that's sort of what comes across.
Yeah. Look, we are starting to run out of time. So just circling around back to the beginning, at this stage in your career, if you were doing it all over again, if you were setting out now, what, if anything, would you change about the way you've approached things?
Oh, God. These are always really difficult questions. I suppose, I don't know. It's easy to say, as I say, because hindsight's 2020, but I think I would have just got into mystery earlier, because I don't know if waste is the right word, because I don't think anything's wasted. I think as an author, you know, it always helps to write different things, because it makes you a better writer in a way by trying different genres and having different experiences. And I've definitely, you know, learned things and gained fans from writing the other books. But I think if I was going to do it again, I would have given myself permission maybe to be brave and just dive into mysteries a lot earlier, like, you know, because once I got into it, it was so comfortable, it was so me. And the books were very successful straight out of the gate, you know. So obviously people were responding to you being, against what I said earlier about being myself, which is what it was.
Yes.
And so I suppose
trying to follow your own drum, beat your own
that's
drum,
difficult. I mean, I don't like to say that, because some people often say, "Oh, write what you love," and that doesn't always work either. Because I mean, you know, the first books I wrote were what I loved. You know, I have a series set that's very much a romantic suspense of the style of Mary Stuart. You know, it's that old-fashioned romantic suspense, which doesn't have sex and all that sort of thing in it, but. And that is what I love, but it isn't really what the market wants. So I think you've tempered what you love sometimes with, you know, what I said earlier about reader expectations. But yeah, I mean, you can find something, you know, in my case, it's obviously worked. But yeah, I would, you know, I don't know whether you could say that, because you can't consciously say, have more confidence in yourself, which is really what.
No, that's right. And some people get a lot of success out of what that little phrase, right to market, that Chris Fox talks about. Some people have tremendous success at that. I just don't think I could do it, but a lot of people do have success.
I think the definition of that's often been confused. I mean, for me anyway, like I think right to market can either mean that, meaning write even something you don't really like, but just because there are readers for it, which I personally couldn't do. But to me, right to market means what I was saying about meeting reader expectations. So, you know, if I wrote my Oxford Mysteries, but there was lots of, I don't know, graphic sex scenes in it, my readers wouldn't be happy, even though it's set in Oxford and it's you know, all the other.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, so it's
or if it was suddenly very dark or something.
Yeah, I mean, I have to be quite careful with that, because I tend to often write dark naturally, without meaning to, and then I have to lighten it up afterwards and to remind myself, no, you're writing a cozy mystery, you're not writing psychological suspense. We can't have, you know, that in it, and humor doesn't come easily to me. Which I always find it, like, my readers are lovely, and you know, they always write, they tell me they love, you know, scenes and it's very funny, but I don't like. I don't know. It doesn't, you know, I sort of try and write a situation that I think is awkward, but I never know whether it's funny or not. And I'm often surprised when, you know, readers tell me they find so-and-so very funny. I'm glad, obviously, I'm very grateful, but it's not something that comes to me naturally. And so, yeah, again, I mean, but I'm conscious that that's, you know, expected, and you try and keep things light if you can.
Yeah. So what is next for Hsin Yee, the writer? What projects have you got under development at the moment?
I'm starting a new series next year, which is very exciting. So I'm just preparing now. Actually, I've been plotting this week. I'm doing lots of sort of brainstorming and research. And then I'm actually supposed to be, starting writing about now. I'm usually late. Like, I give myself little word limits, you know, what I should be getting to every day. But usually I'm behind. I'm thinking, oh no, I'm going to make it up tomorrow. But so I'm starting to write that. And so that'll be launching early next year, a new mystery series. And then...
Can you give us any hints about setting or time period or?
It's in contemporary like the others, and it will be set in England as well. And
yes,
give you a little hint. It's actually, I've recently got into gardening and I love it. I'm like,
wonderful.
I'm really passionate about it. It makes me so happy. You know, I walk out, I look at my garden, and you know, I said I always love cottage gardens, so I love color, and when I walk out and see the color, it just makes me smile and puts me in a good mood. So yes, it's related to gardening.
Sounds really fun. Sounds very much in line with the other ones you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, you never know with a new series. You know, there's always that massive leap of faith, I suppose, that you hope the readers will enjoy it as much as your old one. So it is a big commitment. But yeah, well, fingers crossed.
And when you say you've been plotting, how many books have you sort of got already thought out? Is there more than one, I presume, is there?
No, actually, I don't plot very far in advance. I mean, I don't know. Some people
that's good.
Do, but I can't. I find it quite difficult to. I mean, I have a general premise. I often have a running background plot that I know will be resolved as the books move through the series. So usually, like, there's obviously the main plot, the mystery plot of who gets murdered, who are the suspects, and what happened, and that's wrapped up in every book. But I like my series to have a long-running background plot as well, because I think it's just not add another layer of, you know, to the characters. In the Bewitched series, that's the strongest, where obviously you don't know, you know, Caitlin, the main character, what her background, where her mother is, you know, what really happened to her as a baby when she was found abandoned, all this sort of thing. And so that's all going to be revealed later. But so I have a vague idea where that's going. But as far as detailed stuff, no, I'm not. I don't think it was J.K. Rowling, or they said we had, you know, 7 notebooks of notes with every book plotted already, and that's not me. I find also if you do that, it just doesn't work. Like for me, anyway, I deviate too much from a plot that's too intricately plotted. So I do have a rough-eyed outline for each book, and I know where, you know, I'm going roughly. And obviously, you have to know because I always work out who was the killer, and I work backwards from there usually.
Yes.
But otherwise, no. It's quite loose. You know, I have a premise, but I think if you set up a good premise, like a good sense of conflict, so who the characters are. So, for example, my Oxford series, you know, I knew Gemma's background. She comes from this middle class family, very proper. She's quite sort of uptight herself a little bit, and you know, you have all that conflict there where her ex-boyfriend, you know, who comes back into her life, came from a working class family. There's obviously class conflict there, and with her mother and her, you know, social circle, their expectations. So she's got to come to terms with, you know, whether she chooses her own happiness with a man that possibly her parents don't approve of, or, you know, all that sort of thing. So that's all there. It's not a specific plot, but it's a background conflict. And obviously her own issues with standing up to her mother and that sort of thing, which isn't resolved overnight. I mean, I sometimes get fan mail, people saying, "Oh, I wish she would, you know, do this or whatever." And I see where they're coming from. But, you know, I know from my own experience, like your relationship with your mother is, you know, isn't easily sort of resolved overnight. You know, their behavior. And in the end of the day, you know, you can only change so much. You are your mother's child. So.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Look, we are starting to come to an end. We've sort of run out of time for today. So where can readers find you online? Do you like to interact with your readers online?
Yeah, I do. I'm on Facebook. I have to admit, I'm not very good on social media. So I try to be on at least once a week or every few days. I try and check in. But yeah, I have a Facebook page. It's HY Hanna Author. So readers can find me there, and I always try and answer any questions. You know, I just might be a few days late, but I do always try and answer questions there. And I post about upcoming, you know, releases and news, and I also post lots of photos and just general, you know, behind the scenes or general sort of a lot of stuff about muesli, actually, because a lot of my readers are cat lovers.
Yes, that's always a popular one, isn't it? And I know you've got a lovely newsletter. So how?
Yes, so that's probably the best in terms of definitely getting news, because obviously Facebook's a bit unreliable. I have a newsletter. It's just hyhanna.com/newsletter, like /newsletter. Or if you just go to my website, you can sign up from there. And then that way readers, you know, will definitely inform whenever I have a new book out, whenever I have giveaways. And I usually run, like, I don't do a lot of giveaways, but if I do, they're exclusive to my subscribers usually. So there are things like signed copies, because I live in Australia. Signed copies are very difficult. And I'm sure you know that. And so I don't do a lot of signed copies, but if I do, it's always to my subscribers. And various other like when I went to Vienna, I brought gifts back, and that I did give away for that for my sort of loyal fans. So that's probably the best way to stay in touch. And my website, obviously, I don't unfortunately update my blog very much, and I think I've stopped actually the blog format, but I just put the post up under. So there's a section on my website called Behind the Scenes. It's under fun stuff, and then underneath you've got Behind the Scenes, and that's where I've put all the information about visiting Oxford, where to see the settings of the books, that sort of thing. I've also put the recipes from the books in there, and more about muesli for the people who are interested in her. So that's sort of
great. Yes. Look, in the show notes that will go online with this podcast, we'll put links to all of those pages so that if people are interested, they can check with the show notes and find them easily.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
So wonderful, Hsin Yee. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. It's been wonderful to hear about Oxford and all your adventures there. And we'll be looking forward to this new series about gardens. I will be, with great interest.
Oh, good. I'm glad I've got someone already interested. Are you a keen gardener then?
I am.
Oh, good. Thank you so much for inviting me onto the podcast. It's been great.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, and we'll keep in touch. Thanks a lot.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Joys of Binge Reading podcast. You can find all the details and links for this episode at www.thejoysofbingereading.com. We'd love to hear your comments and suggestions for who you'd like us to interview next. And if you enjoyed the show, take a moment to subscribe on iTunes or a similar provider so you won't miss out on future guests. Thanks for joining us, and happy reading.
The Joys of Binge Reading podcast is put together with fantastic technical help from Dan Cotton and Abe Raffles. Dan is an experienced sound and video engineer who's ready and available to help you with your next project. Seek him out at dcaudioservices@gmail.com. That's D for Daniel, C for Charlie, audioservices@gmail.com, or check our show notes. He's fast, he takes pride in getting it right, and he's great to work with. Our voiceovers are done by Abe Raffles, another gem of sound and screen. Abe has 20 years of experience on both sides of the camera/microphone, as a cameraman director and also as a voice artist and TV presenter. I think you'd agree that his voice is both light-hearted and warm. He is super easy to work with no matter what the job. You'll find him at Abe, A-B-E, at pointandshoot.co.nz. As I say, the full details in the show notes on the website. That's it for now. Thanks for listening. Hopefully see you next week. Bye.